Hey there. Are you ready to unlock a world of brand new, scary stories tonight? Before we dive into it, I want to know, where and when are you watching this? Drop your answers in the comments below and join our community. And now, let's begin. We'd been out on the Appalachian Trail for just over 2 weeks. Enough time for the world to shrink down to boots, breath, and trees. The deeper into the woods we hiked, the more everything else seemed to fall away. Cities, jobs, even names felt smaller out here. It was just me and my friend, moving northbound, chasing that late fall window before the frost crept in too deep. The leaves had already begun their slow, fiery death, burnt orange and deep reds crunching underfoot with every step. Mornings were cold, breath visible in the air, but our pace always warmed us quickly. We'd talk sometimes, mostly nonsense, sometimes not at all. Long silences didn't feel strange in the woods. The forest didn't rush us. It had its own pace, older and quieter than anything we'd known. We'd pass through empty gaps of forest where the canopy arched above like cathedral ceilings. Other times, it closed in tight, all bramble and pine, making you feel watched even when you weren't. But that day, something in the air felt heavier, though neither of us said a word about it. We were a few miles past a trail junction, somewhere in a long, flat stretch with no recent shelters or side trails. The wind had quieted, and even the birds seemed reluctant to speak. It was the kind of stillness that made you realize how much you rely on background noise to feel safe. A silence so full it felt unnatural, like the forest itself was pausing to listen. We pressed on, but slower now, our voices trailing off as we listened without meaning to. That's when I first noticed it. A sound not quite like ours, but almost. Footsteps. Not loud, not rushed, just following. They came in softly, like someone walking barefoot just behind us, matching our rhythm step for step. I turned around, nothing. Just a long tunnel of trees stretching back into shadow. I told myself it was echo, maybe even wind, but I knew better. I didn't say anything right away. What would I even say? That the woods were echoing back sounds that didn't belong to us? That something was pacing us through the trees, just out of sight? Instead, I just looked over my shoulder again, scanning the trail for movement. There was none. But the feeling stuck, the quiet tension of being not alone. The next time I heard the steps, I stopped suddenly. My friend walked a few paces before realizing. He looked back at me, puzzled. "What's up? You hear that?" I asked, keeping my voice low like we weren't the only ones who could hear. He tilted his head, then shrugged. "Hear what?" And before I could answer, the steps stopped. We walked on, but my nerves were starting to fray. Every few dozen yards I'd glance back, waiting for the shape that wasn't there. When the footsteps returned, they were louder, just barely, and unmistakable. That soft crunch of leaves beneath a boot or something like one. Again, perfectly in step, a mirror. A mimic. I stopped again, and so did they. I turned, and again, nothing. But this time, I caught a change in my friend's face. He'd gone quiet, too quiet, and the color had drained from him. "What is that?" he asked, voice tight, eyes wide. Now he could hear it. We picked up the pace, not running but faster, speaking less and listening more. The steps came with us, never catching up, never falling behind. It felt like walking with a shadow, one just barely out of reach. No rustling through brush, no sound of breath, just those steps. And when we stopped, they stopped, always. I yelled once, just to shatter the rhythm. "Hey, who's there?" Silence swallowed the sound like it had never been spoken. My friend looked at me, then at the trail behind us. "You think it's messing with us?" he asked. I didn't have an answer I wanted to say out loud. The footsteps continued for nearly a mile, never more than 20 or 30 feet behind us. Sometimes they faded slightly, then surged back like breathing, but always in rhythm, always in time. Not running, not sneaking, just walking with us. It wasn't a hunter. It didn't feel like prey either. It felt like something observing a ritual, as if it had done this before. The forest still hadn't made another sound. No birds, no wind. We might have been the only living things moving for miles, and yet it still felt crowded. Like we'd been joined by something old and unseen. Then, suddenly, silence. We took another step. No echo. Another. Still nothing. The absence was so sudden it felt like something had been yanked out of the world. We stopped, waited, listened. Just our own breathing and the whisper of leaves in the wind. The footsteps, whatever they had been, were gone. My friend turned around slowly, eyes scanning the woods like they might blink back at him. "Did it leave?" he whispered. "I don't think it ever really arrived," I answered. We camped that night earlier than planned, choosing a site near an overlook with no tree cover. Neither of us said much. We built a small fire and kept close. Sleep came in fits, full of half-dreams and imagined sounds. Every snap of a twig made us flinch. Every gust of wind sounded like movement. I kept waking, expecting to hear footsteps just outside the tent. But they didn't come back. Whatever it was, it had chosen that mile, and only that mile. The woods around us felt like themselves again. But we didn't let our guard down. We didn't talk about it the next morning, not in any serious way. Too easy to write off, too strange to unpack. "Ghost boots," my friend joked as we hiked, but his laugh was hollow. He kept checking over his shoulder. I did too, for days. You expect the wild to be full of animals, of nature, but not of presence. That's what we felt, not danger, not a predator, just a presence. And when something unseen walks with you through the woods, it leaves its prints somewhere deeper than the dirt. The trail wound through northern Massachusetts, close enough to Vermont that I could feel the pull of the border ahead. It was a perfect day for hiking. Blue skies stretched wide and endless, the sun warm but not oppressive. The path ahead was a straight shot, a ribbon of dirt cut clean through tall, sparse pines. There were no hills or valleys to block my view. Just open woods and a silence broken only by my steady steps. I had been walking for hours, settling into that quiet, meditative rhythm the trail offers after enough miles. The trees stood like watchful sentinels on either side, their shadows flickering gently over the packed earth. The world felt very still, like it was holding its breath. The kind of stillness that feels heavy, almost staged. It was in that odd, suspended moment that I first saw him. About 100 yards ahead, a figure appeared on the trail, standing completely still. He wore an old, oversized frame pack, the kind you rarely see anymore outside of vintage photos. His clothes struck me immediately. short 70s-style gym shorts, pale and almost glaring in the sunlight. There was something peculiarly deliberate about the way he stood there, as if waiting for something. I slowed down instinctively, not from fear, but from the sudden sense that something wasn't right. He turned his head slowly to look back at me, a small, almost imperceptible movement. For a breathless second, we made eye contact, or at least, I think we did. Then, without any real hurry, he stepped off the left side of the trail and disappeared into the trees. I quickened my pace, curiosity outweighing caution, my boots crunching louder against the dirt. When I reached the spot where he had been standing, I expected to see him slipping through the trees. The forest here was wide open, the pines spaced far apart, the ground covered in a thin carpet of needles. There were no rocks or thickets to hide behind, no hills or ravines he could have dropped into. But when I looked out into the woods, there was nothing. No figure, no sound, not even a stirring branch. It was as if he had been swallowed up, plucked from the world in the blink of an eye. I stood there for a long moment, scanning the silent woods, heart knocking a little harder in my chest. The emptiness felt sudden, deliberate, the kind of emptiness you notice too much. Logic crept in quickly, as it always does. He was probably just a section hiker, I told myself. Maybe he knew a shortcut, a hidden turnoff I hadn't seen, a path worn down by locals. I even pictured him laughing to himself, some seasoned wanderer playing a harmless trick on the new guy. Still, something gnawed at the back of my mind, a restless, shifting feeling I couldn't shake. It wasn't just that he was gone. It was how he was gone. Like a light switched off, with no trail of footprints, no rustle of movement through the underbrush. Only the heavy quiet of the pines, standing tall and dumb and unhelpful. Only the soft, slow realization that I was alone again. Or maybe not quite. As I moved on, every crack of a twig or shift of a shadow made me turn my head. The woods that had seemed so friendly earlier now pressed in closer, whispering things I couldn't quite catch. I told myself stories to calm down, to flatten the oddness into something small and manageable. Maybe he was a local with an old love for retro gear, out enjoying the same sunshine I was. Maybe he didn't want to talk, didn't want to be bothered, and had hidden himself expertly. But the truth was, I couldn't shake the way he had looked at me, like he knew me somehow. Like he had been waiting for me specifically, on that straight stretch of trail, under that wide, empty sky. I picked up my pace without meaning to, needing distance without really knowing why. That night, in the lean-to shelter I found along the trail, I couldn't stop replaying it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the sun glaring off those short gym shorts. I saw the gleam of the old metal pack frame catching the light, frozen in place ahead of me. Sleep came hard and thin, broken by long stretches of staring up at the black canopy overhead. The wind made the pines groan and creak in the darkness, as if the woods themselves were uneasy. I told myself, again and again, that it had been nothing, just a strange, random encounter. But the woods don't always let strange things go so easily. And neither does your own mind, once it's been invited to wonder. Later on, when I met up with some other hikers, I casually mentioned the guy I'd seen. One of them, an older man who knew the trails better than most, just raised an eyebrow. "Oh, you saw him, huh?" he said, a little too lightly, like someone trying not to spook a horse. They swapped glances, the kind that say more than words, a quick little dance of unease. Apparently, Some folks had reported seeing a ghost hiker around that stretch for years. Always the same: old gear, outdated clothes, a sudden disappearance into the woods. I laughed along with them when they told me. What else was I supposed to do? But inside, something pulled, twisted just a little tighter. Even now, months later, sometimes when I'm alone in the woods, I think about him. Not out of fear, exactly, but with a strange, lingering curiosity. I don't know, who was he? Or who had he been once? Was he a real man, flesh and blood, just living out his own story in solitude? Or was he something else, stitched into the fabric of the trail like a memory you can't quite touch? A spirit, maybe, who never stopped walking, never found the right road out. It was sometime in the early 80s, late summer if memory serves, when I set off alone into the backcountry. The trail was an old one, not heavily trafficked, winding through dense forest and broken up by narrow creeks. I carried a basic frame pack, a tent, and the quiet optimism of someone looking to escape for a few days. The air was warm and heavy, and the woods were loud with insects and the rustle of small animals. It had been hours since I'd passed another soul, and that was how I liked it. Solitude suited the trail. By late afternoon, I found myself descending into a low, wooded ravine, where a creek split the land. The sun filtered dimly through the thick canopy, casting long shadows over the mossy rocks below. It was the kind of place where time seemed to slow, and every sound echoed a little too clearly. I paused at the edge of the creek to fill my bottle, kneeling down beside the cool water. That's when I saw the movement, just a flicker, across the creek, in the trees. At first, I thought it was a deer or a group of hikers setting up camp, but something made me stay still. On the opposite bank, maybe 40 yards out, a group of figures in black cloaks stood in a rough circle. There were 7 or 8 of them, maybe more, and they weren't moving like hikers. Their hoods were drawn, long and pointed, and they stood perfectly still, backs turned to me. Smoke drifted up from their center, pale and twisting, like incense or a fire just beginning to take. I crouched lower behind a fallen log, unsure whether to call out, walk away, or simply keep watching. The whole scene was too quiet, no bird song, no creek babble, just that smoke and those still figures. I felt a tightness in my chest that wasn't fear exactly, but something adjacent to it, sharper. Whatever they were doing, they hadn't noticed me yet, or they were pretending not to. Either way, I knew I wasn't meant to see what I was seeing. The longer I watched, the more surreal it felt, like I'd stepped into a page from some other world. They began to move slowly, raising their arms in unison as if responding to some signal I couldn't hear. The smoke pulsed upward, curling into unnatural shapes, almost like it had form and intention. No one spoke, but the rhythm of their motions suggested ritual, something practiced and old. One of them stepped into the center of the circle and knelt down. I couldn't see what they were doing. The others turned slightly, just enough that I caught a glimpse of one pale face beneath a hood. No expression, just blank, almost waxen, like someone carved it from candlelight. I ducked instinctively, heart pounding hard enough to make my ears ring. My instincts screamed to back away, but my legs felt locked in place. The woods, usually so alive, were watching too, or hiding something worse. I started inching back, careful not to break a branch or kick a rock across the bank. The moment I shifted my weight, one of them turned, fully, slowly, and looked directly across the creek. Not at me exactly, but right where I was hidden, like they knew without knowing. The rest continued, unaffected, as if the ceremony was more important than whoever watched it. But that one figure just stood there, head tilted slightly, as though listening to a thought not spoken aloud. The look wasn't threatening, but it wasn't indifferent either, more like acknowledgement. I could feel the weight of it, like being noticed by something that didn't belong to this time or place. It was enough to break whatever trance had kept me frozen. I turned and crept up the ravine slope, putting trees and elevation between me and that creek. Even after I could no longer see the ceremony, I could still feel its echo pressing at my back. I didn't stop until I'd hiked at least a mile uphill, lungs burning, heart still racing like a trapped animal. When I finally sat down on a rock to breathe, the woods had gone back to normal. Birdsong returned, and the wind moved through the trees like nothing had ever happened. It was almost insulting how quickly nature moved on, how little the forest cared what I'd seen. I kept thinking it might have been some harmless, strange group doing their own thing, but nothing about their stillness, their silence, or that strange moment of eye contact felt normal. It didn't feel like people playing at ritual. It felt like something far older than play, like they believed in what they were doing, and maybe more frightening, like it believed back. I camped far off trail that night, deep in a thicket, more alert than I'd ever been alone in the woods. Sleep didn't come easily. The next morning, I told myself it was just a weird backwoods moment, not worth telling. But it stayed with me, carved into memory like bark into a tree. Over the years, I've told a few people, usually in passing or around campfires. Some laugh, some shrug, but a few go very quiet, like they've seen something too. They say that part of the forest has always had stories. Rituals, lights at night, disappearances. One guy said his uncle saw a group in robes out there in the late 70s, by a different creek. Another woman claimed she once heard chanting in the fog but never saw the source. There's nothing on any maps, of course, just trails and creeks and old-growth forest. But those woods feel deeper than they look, and time seems to stretch in the quiet. Sometimes I wonder if I stumbled across a place that wasn't meant for me. To this day, I don't know what I saw, not for sure. But when I hike alone, and I hear silence fall too quickly, I remember that smoke. I remember the stillness of those black hoods and the way one turned just enough. Enough to say, "We see you," without making a sound. It didn't chase me, didn't speak, didn't follow, and maybe that's what made it so much worse. The absence of threat made the moment linger. Not every strange thing in the woods wants to be found, and not all of them are ghosts. Some of them are flesh and bone, ancient rituals wearing modern faces. They come and go like fog over the trees, leaving no trace but memory. I had set out later than I meant to, chasing daylight up into the foothills, pack light and steps quick. The plan was to make camp before nightfall, but the trail had other ideas, longer, rougher than I remembered. By the time the last of the sun slid below the tree line, I was still 2 miles from the road crossing. Night came fast, as it does in the woods. No streetlights, no hum of the world, just black and breath. I clicked on my headlamp, the beam sharp and narrow, cutting a thin tunnel through the dark. The air was colder now, crisper, and every small sound rang louder than it should have. Somewhere, far off, I heard the cry of an owl, then silence so complete it felt deliberate. I focused on the trail, head down, boots hitting dirt in rhythm, trying not to think about what lay beyond the beam. But then I saw them. The first flash, low to the ground, two glowing eyes reflecting back. I stopped walking just for a second, unsure if I'd imagined it, hoping it was just deer. Then another pair blinked to life, off to the right, and another behind a tree. Soon there were too many to count, scattered, watching, unblinking. Coyotes, I thought, a whole pack, not running, not barking, just there. They moved low and quiet, almost fluid, shadows that seemed to wait rather than stalk. I shouted, loud, sharp words, "Hey, get out of here!" and stomped my foot into the dirt. For a moment they paused. A few even lay down, almost playfully as if they were bored. But they didn't leave. They waited. Then, when I started walking again, they followed. Always just beyond the edge of the light. I tried not to panic, but I could feel adrenaline singing under my skin like static. Coyotes aren't wolves, I told myself. They're shy, they don't want trouble. But 8, maybe more? That's not a curiosity. That's a pattern, a test. The woods felt tighter now, the darkness heavier, like it leaned in with every step. I kept shouting, kept swinging my light in wide, angry arcs, trying to seem bigger, louder. Each time I did, the same routine. They'd pause, recline, wait. Like they were playing a game I didn't know the rules to. No growls, no snarls. Just those eyes, always blinking into view. They never came closer, but they never left. We moved together through the woods like two uneasy shadows sharing the same space. Sometimes I'd hear the crunch of leaves just off trail, or a soft shuffle in the underbrush. Other times, I'd see only one pair of eyes, then suddenly 5, then none. I couldn't tell if they were circling or just drifting along with me, curious and quiet. The deeper into the night I hiked, the more surreal it became. I wasn't scared in the way you'd fear a threat, more like I'd been drawn into something strange. Like I was part of a silent ritual, an unspoken exchange between them and me. They weren't hunting, I don't think, but they were watching and they were waiting. I kept moving, step by step, heart pacing faster than my feet. The beam of my light began to feel smaller, as if the dark was learning how to swallow it. I just needed to reach the road. I'd marked the crossing earlier on my map, a gravel path where the woods opened up briefly. When I saw the pale line of it ahead, stretching across the trail, I almost laughed with relief. The moment I stepped onto it, everything changed. The eyes stopped. One by one, they vanished, flickering out like candles in the distance. No sound, no footsteps, just absence. I turned into place, scanned the tree line. Nothing. They hadn't followed me across. The road might as well have been a wall, and whatever rules they followed, that boundary was one they wouldn't cross. I stood there a while longer, breathing hard, watching the edge of the trees. It was quiet again, the kind of quiet that fills your ears and makes your heartbeat feel louder. The stars above the clearing looked clearer than they had all night. I finally moved on, leaving the woods behind me for a while, but not what I'd seen. It was just animals, I told myself again and again. Smart, curious, organized, but in the dark, with nothing but a beam of light and a pack full of noise, that logic wears thin. There was something else in that encounter, something like a test or a lesson. I hadn't passed it or failed it, I'd just walked through it. And when I think back on it now, it's not fear I remember most. It's the feeling of being watched and not being entirely unwelcome. Since then, I've hiked that trail again, but only in daylight and only with others. Sometimes I look into the tree line and wonder if they remember me. Coyotes aren't ghosts, but they're something more than just teeth and tails. They move between silence and presence in a way few things in the forest can. There's intelligence in their patience, something communal in their gaze. They let me walk, but they made sure I knew I wasn't walking alone. They don't chase, they don't speak, but they surround and they wait. Some things in the wild don't threaten. They observe. And some nights, when I hear leaves stir the wrong way, I remember how many eyes I couldn't see, and how few steps there were between mystery and mercy.